How Unions Defined Environmentalism by Investors Business Daily. Read by OutloudOpinion.com. June 25, 2009. Organized labor. California's frenzy to build solar power plants is being held up by unions citing environmental rules. But plants open to unions are not hitting the same roadblocks, even if they're less environmentally friendly. The New York Times, for all its problems, can still do good reporting. One example being its coverage of unions using environmental regulations in California to try to pressure developers into signing, quote, agreements pledging to use union labor, unquote. Quote, if they refuse, reports Todd Woody, they say they can count on union groups to demand costly environmental studies and deliver hostile testimony at public hearings, unquote. The Times focuses on two solar power companies, OSRA, which has refused to use union labor, and BrightSource Energy, which has, quote, filed plans for an even bigger solar plant and pledged to hire labor-friendly contractors, unquote. While OSRA is the target of union obstruction efforts, organized labor is asking regulators to rush approval of BrightSource's plans even though they, quote, would affect the imperiled desert tortoise, unquote. San Francisco Business Times reporter Lindsay Riddell writes, quote, for environmental purposes, OSRA and BrightSource do almost the same thing. There's very little reason to believe one would have a much different impact on desert creatures than another, unquote. While a union representative told the Times that organized labor doesn't, quote, walk away from environmental problems, unquote, Riddell noted that, quote, it's hard to overlook the discrepancy, unquote, between that rhetoric and the different treatment the unions are giving the two companies. The, quote, green mail, unquote, that the California Unions for Reliable Energy is engaging in is not a new strategy. Organized labor has used environmental laws before to try to force unionization on companies that operate conventional power plants in California. Quote, many businesses face an offer they can't refuse, unquote, Heritage fellow James Shirk wrote in a Fox News opinion piece 2 years ago. Either they sign a project labor agreement, quote, and hire more expensive union members to construct their buildings, unquote, which can increase the cost of a project by 20%, a coalition of builders and contractors believes, quote, or the union will use environmental laws to shutter the project, unquote. The difference in unions using green mail and black mail, says Shirk, is that in green mail, quote, unions use government bureaucrats instead of armed thugs to intimidate businesses, and it happens repeatedly, unquote. Companies that are victims of green mail should stand up to union shakedowns. While refusing to unionize won't allow companies to avoid the snarl of environmental rules, it will improve their chances to operate their businesses at lower costs and provide investors with better returns. Copyright Investors Business Daily, read by Outloud Opinion. For more podcasts, go to ibdeditorials.com and outloudopinion.com.